Good evening. Hi, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Kundalini Code. How you all doing? Hi, Tracy. Hi, Linda. Nice to see you guys. Mikhail. Hello. Hope I'm saying that right. Vision. Hello. Kirsten. Tula. Good evening. How you doing? And Dominique. How's it going tonight? So it's the Kundalini Code. If anyone is new here, this is the Kundalini Code. We go live on Wednesdays and Sundays, 6 p.m. UK time. And Joe Flo, good evening. How do you know when the Kundalini phase is over and self-realization begins? Well, the easiest way is to actually track your progress through a Kundalini awakening, because you can do that. If you study the Kundalini system and know all the different parts of the Kundalini system, then as soon as you've had a Kundalini system, you can track your way through it. Now, I've done lots of videos on that, so you can go through the playlist, the Kundalini Code playlist, if you like, and look at all the videos in there. I've put them in order now, in fact, so that when you go into the playlist, you've got some anatomy videos at the start. I'll put them at the top on purpose so that for questions like this, exactly, you can go straight to the anatomy, the Kundalini anatomy videos, and you can see all the different sections. And I've put a diagram. I've used a diagram to show you. So when you've had a Kundalini awakening, you want to figure out where your K1 energy is in section 1 of the Kundalini system. And you can do that through chakra breathing. And there's a whole process of unlocking the K1 energy and letting it move up the spine through the major chakras. So once you start to realize, once you start to know where your K1 energy is, then you can start to map your Kundalini awakening phase. And because K1 will finish its journey at the Bindu, you can trace that all the way through. Then you can trace K2, which comes down from the ninth chakra to the crown chakra. And then you can trace K3, which moves from the crown chakra to the Bindu. And then when K3 and K1 meet at the Bindu, and then it goes through the Bindu into the lower mind, that starts the transformation process of self-realization. So the way that you know is through tracking it. And you do that through various exercises, various practical exercises where you, and feelings in the body and tracking it. And you know, the other big important thing to mention here is intuition, because a lot of that tracking process does have something to do with intuition as well. You do have to use your intuition as you track that progress as well. And intuition is higher mind to lower mind communication. And if you're going through a Kundalini awakening, then that will start to ramp up that intuition. Kirsten, hi. One thing I've been keen to ask is, did you have knowledge about Kundalini before it awakened? Not really. Well, in a way, yes, but not really. Not specific knowledge about Kundalini, no. I've been part of the whole spiritual journey since I was very young, because my mother was my mother went through a Kundalini awakening in a previous life. And then when she was 14, she finished the Kundalini awakening phase and went into the phases of self-realization. So all she really knew really was the self-realization phases in her own experience. And she also has a very strong background in Vedic philosophy, Advaita, Vedanta, and yoga philosophy as well. So I got taught all those things as I was growing up. But I was never taught Kundalini specifically. And when I I started doing all the self-healing techniques and spiritual practice from an early age, but it wasn't until a bit later on where I actually started having Kundalini symptoms. And then that sort of opened up the world for me in terms of learning about specifically the Kundalini system. And then, as I went through that, I learned more and more and added to it with my own experiences. And then started teaching it, of course, and then added it to with everybody else's experiences as well. Is the life review after death for Kundalini awakened people much easier? Right, this is an interesting one, because the first answer I would go to here is that actually you don't have one. You don't have a life review when okay, well, hold on. There's a few different answers here. If you have a Kundalini awakening and then finish the incarnation before finishing the Kundalini awakening phase, then you would have a life review. If you finish the Kundalini awakening phase and go through the transformation of self-realization and then end the incarnation, then you won't have a life review, because a life review is all about karma. A life review, in your experience when you're having a life review, it's an emotional thing. It's an emotional thing, and you're looking over your life and reviewing your life. That's what you experience. But anatomically, it's about karma. It's about karma transfer from the current life storage to the energy body storage, which is past life karma. And by the way, if any of you are wondering why I should know this, it's because I remember my past lives, and I remember the time in between my past lives as well. Now, what else have you got in your question there? Is the life review after death for Kundalini awakened people much easier? So yeah, you don't have one, basically, if you've gone through the process already. A very, very well developed soul, or a person who has had a Kundalini awakening, will have a much easier life review. Yes, because there will be hardly any karma, basically. Hi, Paul. This purge is relentless. Yeah, well, I know quite a few people who would very much agree with you on that. It is relentless, but it does end. But the thing is that the time frames that we're talking about for the lower mind time scale, perceiving time through lower mind, it's long. That's the thing. So it does feel like it never ends, and it's designed to feel like it never ends. That's part of the triggering as well. The confusion of how long this is going to last, this purging stage, that is all part of the process. That is all part of the purging process itself. So it's important to remember, as you're going through these relentless purging cycles, it's always important to be able to remove yourself from the moment and look at the bigger picture. So the more you can educate yourself about the bigger picture of self-realization and what this is all for, the easier it is to remove yourself in the moment and know that there's a purpose, that there's a meaning to it. Because otherwise, if you're just stuck in the moment, it makes it much worse. Hi, Dominique. How do you know if you've properly surrendered? I'm assuming the higher mind will force you to anyway. Yes, you're assuming right. The surrendering process, post Kundalini awakening phase, the surrendering process happens to you. It's not something that you can make happen. It just happens. The higher mind is battering the lower mind into submission, really, you could say, until it just surrenders everything in its conditioning patterns, in its memories, its grip on the very life itself. So it does just happen to you. How do you know if you've properly surrendered? I have to remind you that it is a long process. The surrendering process is a long process, and every time that you think that you're surrendered, something comes along and shows you that there's some more surrendering to do. But technically speaking, the surrendering process is only for the first 7 years negative cycle. Now, if you have tracked your Kundalini awakening phase, then you know when you started your negative cycle. If you haven't and you're not sure, then it's a bit more difficult to tell when you're going to finish that 7-year cycle, because you don't know if you're in the Kundalini awakening. In fact, you might not know if you have had a Kundalini awakening, and you might not know if you're in the Kundalini awakening phase, and you might not know if you are post Kundalini awakening phase. So that's why it's so important to try and actually track it. Hi, Joe Flo. I'm in the K3, K4 part of the process. I'm wondering if end will be as dramatic as the K1 release. No, it most likely will not be. The end of the Kundalini awakening phase is not really dramatic, but you notice it in subtle changes. Now, if you are tracking your Kundalini energies moving, then you know when you've passed through the last bit of the section 3. But it's not dramatic. There's no fireworks. There's nothing like that. It's just you're moving from one stage to the next stage. That's all it is. Now, you do notice certain things, though. You notice that you are no longer identified with the thoughts and the emotions that are coming through your mind. You notice that you are able to remove yourself permanently from mind itself. Because before, you would keep falling back into the mind, into the negative mind stream, and identify with it. It's you. You are having those experiences. Whereas post Kundalini awakening phase, when you move into the phases of self-realization and K3, K4, then you are no longer the mind. You still feel the emotions at that point. You still experience the thoughts, but they are over here. They are not you. So that's probably the biggest, subtlest change. But it is a subtle change. And then, you know, the processes happening to you start to change and evolve as well. The purging takes on a slightly different form. So everything subtly changes, but it's not like there's a big fireworks session and a big party or anything. That happens later on, to be honest with you. At the end of the negative cycle, as you move into the positive cycle, then things are positively dramatic. Also, how was the process for you? You talking to me there, Kirsten? The negative process was horrendous, let's put it that way. Absolutely shocking. Once awakened, can Kundalini go back to sleep? Okay, well, so that depends if somebody was ready for a Kundalini awakening or not ready. Let's take the case of ready. So if somebody has had a natural Kundalini awakening and they are ready for it, their soul has planned that Kundalini awakening, and it happened at the right time because the karma levels were at the right amount and balanced. And all the emotional life lesson learning, the spiritual lesson learning has been completed. The Kundalini growth is complete. And that's when that person was supposed to have a Kundalini awakening. In that moment, in that situation, it cannot go back to sleep. It cannot be reversed. There is nothing that you can do to stop it. Your higher mind has decided that will happen. And you're at that point, your higher mind is 99.99999% in control of everything. That tiny, tiny little percentage that it's not disappears after the Kundalini awakening phase. That's when the higher mind takes over 100%. Now let's go to the other situation. Someone who's awakened their Kundalini prematurely, way prematurely, or maybe way lifetimes too early, way too early. In that situation, yes, it can go back to sleep, because if somebody's awakened it manually, or they've gone to somebody else to get it awakened, or they've had some sort of trauma which has accidentally awakened it, then the K1 can awaken out of the Kundalini bulb and start moving up a little bit, but it's not going to get very far. There's going to be too many blockages in the way, and sometimes the Kundalini system might only be half grown. Now, in that case, it's going to cause some serious problems, which that's another conversation. But it does heal. It does heal. And in energy healing, if you know what you're doing in energy healing, you can help people in that situation. You can push it back down again. You can push that K1 energy back into the Kundalini bulb and heal it over. So in that situation, you could say Kundalini can go back to sleep. Haley, good evening. How you doing? Hi, Bick. What are the phases of self-realization? Well, I don't want to spend too much time on them because it's one thing at a time, I think, with these explanations, I think. But I will go over them quickly. You've got a negative cycle of 7 years. You've got a positive cycle of 7 years, and you've got a unification cycle of 7 years. This is a balancing process, if you notice. Negative, then positive, then unification. Now, in the negative cycle, you've got phases within that negative cycle. And the first phase is called emotion engine. And the second phase is called percolation. Now, those two actually happen together. And the emotion engine is when the rest of the karma is getting wiped out. And the emotion engine is getting burnt out. The emotional cycle, all the wiring, all the energetic wiring that has to do with our emotional cycle and the emotion chakras is all getting burnt out. And percolation is when the lower mind is getting upgraded into the higher mind. Now, these are two energy frameworks, the lower mind and higher mind. They're magnetic energy frameworks, a bit like the energy body, really. But they start a hybridization process. So they start blending together or upgrade, or you could say lower mind gets upgraded into higher mind. That's percolation process. And what that means is that the higher mind actually is percolating into the lower mind. This is a triggering process. This is all those thought patterns, all those memories, all that conditioning in the lower mind, all that has to be activated to be ironed out by the higher mind. That's what's going on in the percolation phase. But those two phases are happening at the same time. Then there's an integration phase where higher mind and lower mind are integrating. Then there's a hybridization phase where higher mind and lower mind are integrating in a anatomical way, full body. Then there's a non-duality phase. You go through a non-duality phase. Then we call it the next one. We call it a Devatara identity, where the source identity starts coming down into you and establishing your true state of being. And then the last phase we call the self-realized universe. Okay, I'll leave it there, I think. I just had another surrendering conclusion this weekend after feeling fine for a while. Yeah, it does go in fits and starts. Well, you know, spiritual practice, spiritual progress goes in fits and starts all the way through, to be honest with you. You know, in a whole lifetime, you get these moments, these periods of progression that you feel like you're progressing, and then maybe a period of inactivity, spiritually speaking. You're still progressing, you're just learning other things. And it's the same with the Kundalini awakening, and it's the same with the purging process and the surrendering process. It goes like this in these little sort of jumps. Sometimes you feel like you've made like a step forward and then 2 steps back sometimes. But surrendering does, when you say surrendering conclusion, I like that, because quite often surrendering is a process of letting stuff go, one thing at a time almost sometimes. So you suddenly realize that you've let something go, and that's like maybe what you're saying as a conclusion. But then you've got to start on the next thing because you're going to let everything go in the surrendering process. You let go of everything in the conditioning patterns of the lower mind. Truck, hi. What if a person has scoliosis? That doesn't have any bearing whatsoever on Kundalini awakenings, if that's what you're asking. Does it have a bearing on Kundalini awakening, self-realization, that type of thing? Zero bearing zero bearing whatsoever. And in fact, we have someone who is an AIA member who is going through the self-realization process right now who has scoliosis. So it makes no difference whatsoever. But you know, these medical conditions are used as part of one's process. Whatever baggage or karmic baggage we have, it gets used through the process. And that can be psychological baggage, that can be a medical condition, which then creates psychological baggage anyway. But any issues that we have just gets used as part of that process. And we let go of it. You know, I'll give you an example here. If somebody has made an identity out of their medical condition, for example, you know, quite a lot of people identify with certain things that are wrong with them. I am a such and such sufferer, for example. Now that becomes part of the identity, the false identity in the lower mind. These are the sort of things that have to be let go of. So that might well be used as part of someone's process, and they will have to surrender it. Can you explain better about the positive shocking stage? Did I say it was shocking? Oh, okay. So as you move, right. Okay, let me back up through the Kundalini awakening phase. So I'm going to talk about a few positive things here. So that's what you've asked, really. Right. As you go through the Kundalini awakening phase, there are still positive aspects to it. You know, we talk a lot about purging and the negativity because you do have to go through that quite often. Not everyone, mind you, but most people have a fair amount of that to go through. But there are also blissful moments, aren't there? There are blissful moments because bliss is activated as part of the Kundalini system. The bliss channels that run around the central spinal channel, they activate bliss. And the reason for that is because it allows the lower mind to get dampened down a little bit while the ego is getting dissolved. Otherwise, there's too much fighting in the egoic identity. And unconditional love, that normally starts kicking off at some point as well, especially when K1 starts moving past the heart chakra. And as you move into the negative cycle, it's mostly negative, but it doesn't mean it's always negative. But other things are starting to build through the negative cycle, and one of these things is called ekatosha. Ekatosha is it's a bit like emotions, but it's not emotions. All the emotions disappear very gradually through the negative cycle, really. And ekatosha starts to build very gradually. Ekatosha, there are 4 types of ekatosha, and these are the only things that are really felt as an addition to awareness afterwards. And one is unconditional love, one is bliss, one is enthusiasm, and one is joy. But they're not emotions. They're not on the duality scale of positive and negative. Because the duality scale of positive and negative is left behind completely. Ekatosha starts to build, but it really only comes into its own in the positive cycle. And what happens is that the ekatosha itself is an addition to awareness. So awareness itself is peace. So that's another thing that that starts growing. Deep peace starts growing as your awareness grows. But peace is the background state of being. It's not an addition. It's not like an emotion that gets put on top of your awareness. Your awareness itself is the substrate in which everything is happening in your experience. peace and awareness are the same thing. So that starts to expand, and you start to experience deep peace, because deep peace is not only inside you but outside of you. So that's what really starts to grow. And ekatosha is like it's like an upgrade to emotions, if you like, but it's an addition into awareness. And these ekatoshas start to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and you start to feel them more and more, basically. They're not like, now you would have felt these things before, obviously, unconditional love, bliss, peace, and joy. You would have felt them before as emotions, but ekatosha is a different thing. They're not technically emotions, and when you feel them, they're very elastic. You feel them all together, and they're all joined together. You can't explain it more than that. You have to feel it. But they're not actually emotions. They're not within that duality scale, because the duality scale, I'll just explain this bit as well. The duality scale of positive and negative emotions is a prison. It's a prison because it perpetuates the idea of suffering, basically, because you can't have the positive without the negative. And the positive emotions in themselves lead to negative emotions anyway, because of desire, and because of the human aspect of chasing positive emotions, which is attention, which is a desire. That's a negative emotion. So positive emotions always lead to negative emotions anyway. Now, ekatosha is free from all that, but that comes in as the emotions are starting to disappear, basically. There is nothing beyond the illusion. Yeah, no, I like that. That's absolutely true. Absolutely nothing. But what I've just described, awareness or infinite peace or infinite deep peace, that is nothing. That is the same thing as saying nothing. Because when you realize your true self, the awareness behind the mind, you realize it's nothing. That's the irony, isn't it? We go through the journey of spiritual evolution, lifetime after lifetime, because the ego thinks it is achieving something. It's going to achieve something, or the lower mind identity. It thinks it's going to achieve something. Enlightenment, self-realization, that's where it thinks it's going. It thinks it's going up there, right? Well, the irony is that it's the opposite, because when you go through Kundalini awakening and self-realization, what you find is that you're going that way instead. And when you get to the true self, you realize there's nothing there. Your true self is nothing, absolutely nothing. But it's an infinite nothing. It's an aware, conscious nothing. And it's an infinitely peaceful nothing. Joe Flo, hi. Can your third eye be open, but you don't have inner sight? Or is aphantasia forevermore? Okay, good question. So, yes, your third eye can be open, but your higher mind can restrict what inner sight you have. 100%. And for somebody who's going through a Kundalini awakening, it is 100%, I would say it's 100% certain that you do not have a problem with inner sight. Absolutely not. Now, the reason why you are not seeing something is because if you're going through a Kundalini awakening, it's your higher mind that's restricting it. And I've seen this many times, and people's higher mind can restrict their inner sight or their intuition for various reasons. Quite often it's a triggering thing. Quite often it's designed to annoy the lower mind. That's usually the biggest reason, to be honest with you. But what you find is that your intuition is still there. Just because you don't see something doesn't mean there's no intuition there. There's so many different types of intuition. For example, do you just know things, perhaps? Because knowing is a different pathway of intuition to the visual intuition through the brow chakra. Knowing comes through the crown chakra. And there's other types of intuition that control your actions as well. Your higher mind can control your lower mind through your actions. So quite often, seeing inner sight is not necessary very, very often, because you are doing the right things naturally through your intuitive action. However, when you go through self-realization, it will all switch on at some point. So aphantasia never, forevermore, absolutely not. If you're going through self-realization, that will switch on 100%. And the reason is because part of self-realization is actually a full access to higher mind vision. And higher mind vision includes astral vision. You start to see the astral dimensions all the time. You start to be able to communicate in the astral dimensions all the time. That is what is coming up. That's what's on the horizon. So your inner sight will have to be working for that. So it's just a phase. There's a reason why your high mind is restricting it. That's all. Is this related to Jehovah? Not sure what you mean there. Apart from, is this related to God? Well, if you mean God, then you could say that universal awareness is another word for God, although universal awareness is a way of describing it without without personalizing it, without creating a personal identity which is separate from yourself. Is your organization for visit as well, or more for research? We do all sorts of things in Aya. We've got all sorts of projects. We work with local communities, local organizations and charities, the council. We teach self-healing techniques, well-being training. We also have healing programs for the general public. We have self-healing programs, we have energy healing programs. We also have a research department, as you've mentioned there as well. Is a spiritual awakening the same thing as Kundalini? Not necessarily, but it can be. So spiritual awakening is a bit of a catch-all term that many people use in many different situations. Basically, it can mean any sort of big change in your life which has anything to do with spirituality. And to be honest with you, everything in our lives is spirituality. So you could say that any massive change in somebody's lifetime is some sort of spiritual change. But quite often in throughout the journey of spiritual evolution, people may sometimes have like an epiphany or a moment of clarity or a sudden view of universal awareness and deep peace. And that might be a temporary thing, but it might change the course of their life. It might push them into a certain direction or a profession. It might encourage them to look into spirituality. It might change everything for them in that particular lifetime. That could be called a spiritual awakening, of course. But that's not what Kundalini awakening is. Kundalini awakening is a specific type of spiritual awakening. Kundalini awakening happens at the end of the spiritual evolution or reincarnational journey. It's the culmination of reincarnation. That's what Kundalini awakening is. You could say it's the biggest spiritual awakening, perhaps, because it is a type of spiritual awakening. You know, Kundalini is a system in the energy body which grows and grows and grows over many incarnations. And it grows, the more spiritual lessons we learn as a soul, then the Kundalini grows up through the spine and up to the ninth chakra. And when it's ready, When all the lessons have been learned and karma has got down to a certain amount and balanced, then that soul is ready for a Kundalini awakening. And the Kundalini is a system in the energy body which opens up through that Kundalini awakening phase. It opens up a channel to the source, which is at the 9th chakra. And then things start coming down from the source into that person from the 9th chakra. And then that person starts going through the process of self-realization, the realization of their true self. And they see through the illusion. They see through the illusion of the false self, the personality, the lower mind. They see through the illusion of reincarnation. And that's why sometimes it's called liberation. If you're trying to understand Kundalini more, if you go to the playlist that we've created on our account and go to the Kundalini Code, then there's loads and loads. There's about 300 videos in there about Kundalini, but we've put some specific ones at the top. So some anatomical ones, so to understand the Kundalini system. Hi, Dominic. Do we still have desire in the negative stage? Because right now I'm not even sure what I want. The desire in the lower mind disappears through the negative cycle. And it's a long process. But yeah, it gets triggered and triggered and triggered. And quite often for a lot of people, it will be about wanting it to go quicker, or wanting the pain to stop, or wanting the purging process to stop. Now that is a desire. And it's getting triggered constantly as part of the purging process. So there's so many things happening at once when you go through the phases of self-realization. You might be purging a particular thought pattern or in the mind with regards to something, but it's causing pain and it's causing suffering, and you're wanting that to go away naturally. So you're purging that as well. But yeah, it disappears very gradually as you go through the negative cycle, and it goes along with that journey of surrender. Because the more you surrender, the more you're not attached to any outcomes. Because desire is all about wanting, isn't it? And it's all about wanting a particular outcome from whatever you're doing. That's where the problem lies, because when the outcome doesn't match what you wanted, then that causes a tension, that causes a pain. Now, the process of surrender forces you to let go of your attachments to the outcome of anything, eventually, anything at all. So it's a very strange process to go through, because eventually you start to just trust that the plan is a perfect plan, and there's nothing you can do about it anyway. But you have to jump into the plan and allow it to take you wherever it takes you, always trusting that it's the right direction that needs to happen. That's part of surrender, growing trust. And desire just very slowly disappears, because eventually you just don't care what is going to happen. You are okay with anything that's going to happen, anything at all. And it's a strange thing when you start to actually make actions in the present moment, when you're actually doing things in the present moment, and you go through this process of thinking, well, I'm doing this because I want an action, an outcome, and you get all confused for a while, don't you? I'm doing this in the present moment because I want an outcome, but eventually you start to make actions in the present moment without any care of outcome. And this is when the source or your high mind starts taking over, because you don't need an outcome. You just need to do what you're told in the present moment, or what your Akashic stream is directing you to do. It's a confusing process to go through, though. I'll warn you. Can somebody have dark night of the soul for 9 years? Yes, absolutely. Now, dark night of the soul is another one of these terms, a bit like spiritual awakening, that can be used for a great many things, to be honest with you. So dark night of the soul can be used in anywhere in the spiritual journey when it comes to describing spiritual suffering in some way. But in Kundalini awakening, it is used specifically quite a lot in Kundalini awakening, isn't it? And Kundalini, and it's when the ego starts to dissolve that quite often dark night of the soul comes along. You know, there's a lot of purging in the Kundalini phase as well. There's a lot of blockages you've got to unblock to allow the K1 energy to move up the spine. But when that egoic identity starts to dissolve, that ego resists and that ego mourns. It's almost like the ego knows what's happening to it and it's grieving for itself before it's even disappeared. And so the Kundalini awakening phase can last a long time. You know, the people can take decades over the Kundalini awakening phase, and even sometimes multiple lifetimes. I've known 2 instances already where somebody has had a Kundalini, no, 3 instances already where somebody's had a Kundalini awakening in one lifetime, and then they've ended that incarnation, and then they've come back into a new incarnation to finish off the Kundalini awakening. So yeah, it can take a long time sometimes. That's why whenever you are sure you've had a Kundalini awakening, the best thing to do is to start tracking it. And then you can get yourself through that Kundalini awakening phase as quickly as possible. We never advocate for people to try and awaken it manually, but once it has awakened naturally, then there's things you can do to encourage it to go quicker so that you don't get stuck in that Kundalini awakening phase, because that's the one that can last for ages. If you get stuck at a blockage somewhere, and the solar plexus is the solar plexus chakra is usually where people get stuck the longest, because that's the seat of the egoic identity. And the egoic identity, if it's too strong, it won't budge. And if you don't know about it, you don't know what to do to actually encourage it to budge. So people can get stuck there for quite a long time. And so quite often people will have a Kundalini awakening and they will think that they are self-realized, for example, and they don't know that it's just the start of a long process. And so they think they're done, but unfortunately they're stuck somewhere in the lower chakras. And that's where the time can get spent very easily. Is the higher mind the awareness? I'm glad you asked that, because it often gets confused. And when this is all about language. This is just about language and different words that people use. Now, when we use the term higher mind, that is not referring to awareness. That's not referring to the higher self that some people call awareness. Higher self, lower self, some people say. Higher self, when people use that word, they are talking about the true self, the awareness behind the mind. When we use the term higher mind, it's mind. It's there's a lower mind, which is the analytical, day-to-day thinking mind that everybody knows so well, with the mind stream, constant thoughts all day long. That's the lower mind. The higher mind is still mind, but it's actually the part that reincarnates. So it's the soul. You could say it's the soul, or the thinking part of the soul. And that is different from awareness. It's still mind at the end of the day. It's got a thinking part to it, extremely intelligent, vastly superior to the lower mind in terms of thinking capacity, cognition, because the lower mind really is just designed as a survival tool. The lower mind really is just designed to keep the material body alive. That's just one incarnation, the lower mind and the material body. The higher mind reincarnates again and again and again and again. That has all the past life memories, and it guides the lower mind through intuition. Awareness, completely different, but it is channeled through the higher mind. Awareness itself is channeled through an organ called the awareness filter, or the conscious awareness filter. And that is an organ of the higher mind. But awareness itself is non-physical. It's channeled through that organ, but it's non-physical. It has no form whatsoever. I often do AP during meditation. I'm not sure what that is. What do you mean? What's AP? But not long. Are you saying this will get more stable and longer? Yeah, sorry, don't know what AP is. If you could let me know. Every human is own God. Well, there's a lot of truth to that, to be honest with you, because as we were just talking about awareness, now, awareness itself is non-physical and it is infinite and it is universal. There is just one awareness, and it's the same awareness in everyone. But what happens is that the source of the universe creates this illusion of separation as it goes through the journey of life. It creates this illusion of separation and individual awareness. So we all experience what we can call an individual piece of awareness itself, being channeled through that awareness filter that I was just talking about. And everyone's got a separate awareness filter that has form. That's an organ in the higher mind. But the awareness which is being channeled through it really is nowhere, and it's everywhere. It is infinite. But that means that everybody's awareness, the awareness which is looking out of your eyes right now, is the same awareness which is looking out of my eyes, and it's the same one universal awareness. So every human is own God. Is there's truth to it. If you want to call universal awareness a God, or yeah. How do you start Kundalini awakening? Well, the best way to start Kundalini awakening is to leave it alone and don't chase the Kundalini awakening, because if you chase it, you may well block yourself. The best thing to do is to go back to spiritual practice and self-healing techniques. That's the quickest way to self-realization. Now, if we start chasing a Kundalini awakening, then we can cause ourselves a lot of problems, because Kundalini is really just physiology. Kundalini is the system in the energy body which allows the process of self-realization. So really, it's self-realization that you really want to be chasing. And the way you chase self-realization is through spiritual practice. And spiritual practice can involve all sorts of things, like moral living, for example, self-healing techniques like the journey of meditation, emotional management techniques, psychological techniques, breath work, pranayama, yoga, and nutrition and exercise for the material body. All these types of self-healing techniques and spiritual practice, that gets you to self-realization. And when you are ready for it, your Kundalini will awaken naturally. Your higher mind will take care of that. So you don't actually need to go and try and do anything to awaken the Kundalini, because if you're not ready for it, if somebody is not ready for a Kundalini awakening, then they can cause themselves big problems by messing with it. There's some very powerful energies in there. So you want to be very careful with the Kundalini system and not try and tamper with it too much. Until you have a Kundalini awakening and you know you've had one, then you can do some exercises to make it go quicker through the Kundalini awakening phase. How to achieve enlightenment? Well, I guess I've just answered that in the last question, I suppose. But remember, it is a process which takes hundreds or thousands, even sometimes, of incarnations. So the spiritual journey, the spiritual evolution journey, is not just one lifetime. It is over many, many, many incarnations. Now, if somebody's having a Kundalini awakening in this incarnation, what that means is, if it's a natural one and you're ready for it, what it means is that person has done the spiritual work over many, countless incarnations previously, and they are ready for it in this lifetime. Where are you from? I am from the UK. I am in Cornwall at the moment in the UK. Do your energy healing programs have a location? We work in a virtual way, so there is no location actually. Do Kundalini awakened people often become spirit guides? Yeah, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Now, so the easy, quick answer is yes, but I would add and say always become guides now, and not necessarily just spirit guides. So a Kundalini, a person going through self-realization will always, part of their higher purpose that comes down from the source will always be about helping others in one way or another. And the highest form of help that you can give anybody at all is to help them along their road or their path of spiritual evolution towards self-realization. So it is inevitable that anybody going through self-realization will always become either an educator, a, a healer, or a guide of some kind. So that doesn't mean that you have to wait until you are finished with this incarnation to become what you're calling a spirit guide. You can start in this incarnation. But after your work is done in the material plane, you will go on to the astral planes and carry on your work there. And there you will probably be come under the title of spirit guide. Yes. What about twin souls? Well, it depends exactly what you mean there, to be honest with you, when you say twin souls. If you're talking about this whole twin flame thing, that's one thing. Or if you're just talking about souls that have a intertwined partnership and evolve together, because that happens all the time. You souls have soul families, and within those soul families that are reincarnating together over many, many incarnations, um, quite often you get these little partnerships that the two souls get twisted up together in their incarnation, and they have multiple incarnations together as partners quite often. That happens all the time, and quite often you can actually go through self-realization together with that person as well. I know countless, well, I know many people who are in that situation, myself included. But if you're talking about the twin flame thing, well, that's slightly different. There is a misconception in the twin flame thing. I won't talk too much about it now because I don't know if you're asking about it, but the main misconception is the idea that a soul can be split into two. That is anatomically impossible. It's not really how it works. It's a misunderstanding. It's a misinterpretation of duality and the balancing of duality as you go through self-realization. It's what we call a twisted intuition. It's intuition that comes through people, but there's a metaphorical twist to it, which if you interpret your intuition literally, sometimes you misinterpret it because there's a metaphor in there. Hi, do we have to unlock the chakras one by one? So that depends if you are in a Kundalini awakening phase or if you are pre-Kundalini. If you're pre-Kundalini and you're doing chakra breathing or chakra work as a self-healing technique or a spiritual practice, which is essential, by the way, to unblock the chakras, that is essential for the spiritual journey. At that point, you don't have to do them in any particular order. There's 5 emotion chakras: the root, the sacral, the solar plexus, the heart, the throat. Those are 5 emotion regulating chakras, and they regulate a different part of the personality, and that's called energy psychology. But doing work on those, you can do at any any order whatsoever. In fact, you have to keep doing it because they keep getting blocked up again because of the psychology in the mind. However, when you're going through a Kundalini awakening, then it does help to do it in a particular order. You should start at the root and then move up the chakras along the spine, because you are trying to find your K1 energy, where your K1 energy is. That's what awakens from underneath the root chakra, from the Kundalini bulb, and it will get stuck at the blockages along the way. So you start at the root chakra and unblock that. Then you know that it's not stopping the K1 energy. And if there's a blockage at the sacral, then the K1 energy will have got to there. So you go to the sacral and you unblock that. And if the root is unblocked and the sacral's unblocked, then you know that it's gone past them two. Then you go to the solar plexus next, and so on, basically. So you go up the spine, and this is how you can actually trace the passage of K1 up the spine. Okay, I'm going to have to go in 5 minutes, just so you know. Here's an interesting one. Do you need a master to achieve complete enlightenment? Quick answer is no, absolutely not. Now, the reason why that lingers in society is because, traditionally speaking, in the yogic philosophies and in South Asia and Southeast Asia, a long time ago, as the concept of self-realization was evolving, or the knowledge was starting to come through from people's higher minds, then quite often there was like a master and a load of disciples, or a guru and an ashram or whatever. And it was sort of, that's how it was taught. There was one person who was going through it, perhaps, and or at least spiritually well developed, and a spiritual teacher. And then there's lots of people learning off that person. And that's just how it was done for so long. But these days, it's all changed now, isn't it? Because we have globalization and knowledge is everywhere. These knowledges are everywhere in the world because of the internet and books and integration of different cultures and the movement of people around the world. And you can pretty much self-learn anything these days, can't you? So, and that's the same for spiritual evolution, to be honest with you. So you don't need to have a master or guru or anything like that to go through spiritual evolution and get to self-realization. In fact, you know, many people are going through a Kundalini awakening now who have absolutely no idea of anything spiritual at all. I personally know a lot of people that are in that category. They've never done anything spiritual in their whole lifetimes, and they're having Kundalini awakenings and going through self-realization. And the reason is because they don't need it. And the reason for that is because they've done all the work in many, many, many lifetimes previously. And now they're just having spontaneous Kundalini awakenings because they're ready for it. And it's part of the global awakening, which is really starting to kick off now. Can we stop reincarnating if we want? You can stop for a while. The higher mind can stop for a while. So it depends what you mean by you in that sentence, or we in that sentence. The higher mind can stop for a while, but it will have to come back at some point to get rid of the rest of its karma. And that is inevitable. It can't stay away from reincarnation until the karma has been removed. And then once you go through self-realization, you can't reincarnate anyway. The anatomy completely changes and you can't incarnate back into a lower mind and material body. All right, I'm going to have to go. 7 o'clock. All right, nice one. Thanks for coming along, guys. Thanks for your comments and your experiences. And we go live on Wednesdays and Sundays, 6 p.m. UK time. And this is the Kundalini Code, in case anybody has only just popped in. This is the Kundalini Code, where we talk about the Kundalini system, Kundalini awakenings, healing, the healing journey to get to the point of self-realization, which then self-realization itself is the highest form of healing that you can go through in the whole universe. And all of these subjects are within the Kundalini Code. So hopefully see you guys on Wednesday, 6 p.m. UK time. All right, nice one. Nice to see you guys. See you soon. Bye-bye.